Hey everyone, how's it going? It's the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, and I am joined by my partner in crime, Scott Schultze. Scott, another week, another loss, another embarrassing loss. I don't really know what there is to say. We'll talk about that. I guess if you want to call it a performance against the Vikings. There's excuses galore. There's a lot of other things going on, but it is what it is, another blowout. How are you doing otherwise, my friend? We're very close to Christmas, and I know you are – that's your jam, buddy.
Pretty good. And as you mentioned, yeah, the Bengals are somewhat watchable, but that's all right because there's a new Star Wars movie out, so I got to watch that.
Yeah, what'd you think of that?
I liked it. Of the three new ones, I guess we call them new ones, like Episode 7, The Force Awakens, and then the one last year, Rogue One. Of the three new Disney new ones, I'd say it's my least favorite, but I still like it. I have some friends, a lot of friends who seem to hate it. I did not hate it. I think the middle is kind of boring. I'm not going to spoil it for whoever hasn't seen it, but I will say it was my least favorite of the three, but I still really liked it. I liked the beginning. I liked the end.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am with it, and good movie. I kind of want to watch it again, though, to be able to catch everything. You know, I kind of feel like there was other and you know, it was slow at some parts, and there's a lot of stuff going on at certain parts. So I kind of want to watch it again to make sure I catch everything, you know, in that movie. And of course, even though we're football fans, we're also major Star Wars geeks on this program, and I think a lot of our listeners may be in the same boat as well. So if you haven't it's still, I mean, obviously worth a watch, and I think everybody who has seen it can agree that it's still better than the prequels, you know, in terms of quality and even CGI and all that stuff. But let's kind of talk about some football, though, Scott. And instead of starting as we normally do with the Bengals, I'd like to start with you some fantasy football, because this week, and you're our fantasy football guy. You're our resident fantasy football guy. This week is championship week for a lot of teams, or a lot of leagues. I am actually in a championship game myself. You, I guess, are in a couple of championship games. You had noted. I guess I have a question, and I guess if there's another question or two from our listeners that they want to throw at you.
Well, before you ask your question, I would ask, how did you get in your championship? Because before the season, you said you were really bad at it, didn't know anything, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm in a championship.
Well, wait a minute. I didn't say I was really bad. I said I was more peaks and valleys. Like I either had like, you know, over the, you know, 10, 15 years I've played, you know, I've had a couple of runs, you know, a handful of runs into the playoffs and all that kind of stuff. This is probably the best team I've put together, and I have ridden Le'Veon Bell and Todd Gurley, no doubt, to the championship. Every week they seem to put up 15-plus points. I hope I didn't jinx them this week, but they have been key. And it's especially the way my league is set up. Now, the question I have for you, at least me personally, is what I have a flex position, and I have basically three guys that I'm looking at that all are projected. First of all, they're all projected to have similar points, and second of all, they're all questionable this week. So I have Jamison Crowder, I have Tevin Coleman, and I have James White. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on those guys and where, because obviously, like I said, I have Bell, I have Gurley. Those are my studs. I got to keep them in there. Those are the guys I'm thinking of putting in there for a flex position. Wild card for me would be Jesse James, the tight end. If I can throw another tight end in there, but those are the three I'm thinking of. What are your thoughts on that?
Man, you didn't exactly make it a cupcake question, did you? Me personally, and granted, you know, everyone can do what they want. It's very hard to, especially with Rex Burkhead going out, I would still steer away from James White just because I absolutely do not trust the New England Patriots. They have a very bad habit of, on a weekly basis, They seem to totally change the game plan. One week it's 10 passes to Gronk for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. The next week it's all about the running backs catching out the backfield. The next week they're just running up the middle. Then you never know what you're going to get with them. So James White is a guy he can get you a ton of points or he can get you nothing. And I'm one of these people. I'm more the cautious optimistic. Let's go for the guy that's a little more stable, a little more secure. So that also kind of steers me away somewhat from Tevin Coleman, just because he is a true backup. And even last week when Freeman had a huge game, Coleman only had 3 points. I mean, he's going to be a very feast or famine guy too. So of that, I'd probably lean Crowder, although I don't like saying that because I hate using receivers in flex positions unless I absolutely have to. I tend to be more of I'm an old school guy. I've been playing fantasy for a dozen some years, so I always go with the running backs. The old days when you had your 2 stud running backs that carried your team, and quarterbacks were drafted almost as late as kickers and defenses were, and so it kind of pains me to say it, but I'm leaning Crowder without having done a lot of research, just because I don't trust Now, if Coleman was in more of a committee position, I could see it, but since he is a true number 2. And his usage is very sporadic. James White is going to be very sporadic just because Bill Belichick apparently seems to have it out for fantasy football people and refuses to let fantasy folks get a gauge on who to draft other than Gronkowski and Brady. I mean, with that team, it's a total crapshoot what you're going to get. So I'd probably go Crowder. I'm not going to say, it's an absolute best pick of the 3. I'm sure people would argue for either one of the 3 for different reasons. That's my answer. If it works, you can thank me next time we do the podcast. If it doesn't work, you heard it somewhere else.
Good to know. We got one more question for you before we move on to true Bengals stuff. And I've got a very happy child in the background in case you can't hear him. I mean, good Lord, you would think I'm hurting him with something, and all I did was put him in his crib. Jeez,
apparently
Louise.
He didn't like my answer.
Apparently he didn't. So, he'll have to deal. We're Ferbering him, I guess, right? Isn't that the term? We got a question from John Telly in the chat. I have Mohamed Sanu, Josh Gordon, and Juju Smith-Schuster, but I only have 2 slots to play them. Which 2 should I play?
I'd say without a doubt Smith-Schuster, because I think Antonio Brown's out, so they have to throw the ball to somebody. So I think he's a no-brainer. The other one between Sanu and who is he, our guy?
Sanu, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Josh Gordon.
I guess if it was me, I'd say definitely Smith-Schuster, especially if Brown's out, because you figure he's going to get a lot of work, and they're still kind of in that hunt for the. I know they lost, but if they win a game, Patriots can lose a game, they can still kind of get that number 1 seed. So they're still going to be trying until it's kind of settled. So I would definitely say him. The next 2, I'd probably go Sanu, just because it is really hard to trust the Browns and any team with Deshaun Kaiser as the quarterback. So as of right now, without doing a lot of research, and I tend to overanalyze things, but without having done any analyzation, I'd say Smith-Schuster, then Sanu, and then probably Gordon would be my 3.
Okay. In terms of ranking of how you would play them, right? Okay.
Yeah. Gotcha. If I was picking 2 of the 3, I'd probably put them in that order.
There you go. A little bit of last-minute championship week fantasy football advice from Scott Schultze, the fantasy football expert on our program here. Scott, thanks for that. I don't have
one.
What's that?
Just one comment I wanted to ask. So any prayers or well wishes you want to make for my fantasy teams? Because I definitely win in both because 2 years ago I had won 9 championships out of 18 seasons. So I was at 50%. Doing really well. Last year I was in 2 leagues, did not win the championship in either one. So that made me 9 out of 20. This year I'm in 2 leagues and I'm in 2 championships. So if I can win them, I can go to 11 out of 22 and get back to 500. And I really want to get to 500. So if you're playing me and you're watching this, you want to sit your people. I'd love to get back to saying I'm able to. I've won half my leagues. It kind of sucks saying I've won like 48%. I want to get back to 50.
Yeah.
And I actually won the leagues is our Cincy Jungle League with the other writers and contributors.
Oh, nice. Who you playing there?
I took out Rebecca last week, and now I'm taking out her facing her replacement in Jason.
Okay. Good to know.
So if I can take him down, I think it's Jason. So if I can take him down, then and then in my other league, which is more profit, the Cincy Jungle ones is kind of more for fun, but as far as finances go, but the air one's the money one. So yeah, I'd like to get to 50%.
Okay. I know you're a little limited on time, my friend, so let's just kind of move into a couple of different topics here. Again, this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Anthony Cosenza, Scott Schultze. We are taking some fan questions. We already have a bunch already in the queue that have been sent to us, and we appreciate that. So if you're watching us live on YouTube, you can send them in the chat or via Twitter at BengalsOBI, via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We're also streaming at cincyjungle.com, so you can leave them in the comment thread there. We'll try and monitor all of that. And again, you can get the program, iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, the whole shebang, and appreciate the support. Scott, I don't want to talk a lot about the Vikings game because that was just a debacle. What I want to ask you about it, aside from, to me, it shows quite a bit of the leverage that Mike Zimmer has with his team and how his team plays with a passion and, basically a zest, if you will, that the Bengals are not. But I guess before the game, about an hour and a half or 2 hours before the game, news came out, and it was a report by Adam Schefter that he had heard through some reliable sources that Marvin Lewis was not going to return in 2018. Now, I think we all kind of thought about it. We all kind of, thought that was going to be the case and all that stuff. It was not. It was not corroborated. We just kind of thought, especially as the team kind of struggled. But I guess now, do you think, and granted, these are guys on a team, early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s, so they're really into social media. Do you think that they caught wind of this? And aside from the fact that, hey, they probably knew they were out of the playoff picture anyway, but do you think they caught wind of this before the game and that had something to do with what we saw on Sunday?
I'd say it'd be impossible for them not to have heard about it, just because, as you mentioned, they obviously have social media. I'm sure they're on their, their laptops, their phones, their iPads and iPods and all that stuff before the game. Back in, our day, I'm sure it was, Sony Walkmans and whatever. Nowadays, it's, a little more advanced. So, yeah, it'd been impossible for them not to hear. The thing we don't know is, obviously, they would have heard something. You would have heard the rumors in the locker room. You have to assume Marvin Lewis, hopefully, took a leadership role in that position and, said, okay, this is what you read. This is what you heard. Here's the real story. You would hope that happened. We don't know if it happened. We know after the fact, he kind of denied it when he had his press conference, when he makes stuff up and says, halftime adjustments or, pixie dust and how he's scared of rookies and whatever. So you don't know if he actually said something before the game to address it. Assuming he did not, you would have to think, well, it has to affect them somehow. But on the other hand, you look at, the snap counts, and they had a ton of rookies in, guys who I don't think it'd be too affected because they're just fighting to get playing time and get on the field. Guys like C.J. Uzama and Ryan Glasgow and a lot of folks who seem to get a lot of, and those linebackers, Hardy Nickerson and the air kid, Brandon Bell, and so you hear the names and you hear a catch and a tackle and you're like, wow, that guy's in. So it's one of these things where it obviously, they had to hear it. They had to affect them, but it's hard to, I think for me, it's hard to judge how much, because you don't know if Marvin Lewis stepped up and said something to the team beforehand to kind of, head this off, or if he just kind of stayed out of the picture and let it, build up momentum and kind of let it get out of control. And then you hear after the fact, some of the things, there's other rumors that he's not going to be back as a coach because they're moving him into general manager role, and they might hire an internal guy. And then when you hear that, you're like, well, what the heck? I thought we were getting rid of this guy. But I guess that's a separate issue. Sorry.
It is, but it is kind of still a little bit relevant. So, I agree. I think this team absolutely sleepwalked through this game, and they didn't even show up the week prior against the Bears. And, I don't know if Marvin Lewis would have publicly said to his team, "Hey, blah blah blah, I'm not coming back." That would be very odd. And his responses later in the week, after as the beat reporters talked to him and asked him questions on this, were very non-committal and just kind of blah. But I think that definitely. I think it played a part in it. I also think that, like you said, there's a lot of new guys in the lineup. There's a lot of guys kind of making the quote unquote business decisions where they're not tackling well and they're not making big hits because they want to stay healthy and they want to, whether they're looking at free agency the next year or they don't want to injure themselves in a meaningless game. And unfortunately, that also was an indictment of coaching, because even if you don't have a lot of your starters in or guys are injured, you still want guys to go and play hard and not look like they're going through the motions, which the Bengals certainly did against the Vikings. Now they have another game coming up against the Lions. Quickly, because I want to get to some other stuff before you got to get out of here, Scott. Just at this point in the season, you're 5-9. A lot of young guys now on the roster, some high-profile guys on IR. What do you look for in terms of a positive? What do you try and take away as a fan, as a coach, in a game like this against the Lions? I think a lot of fans now kind of want them to lose out so they get a higher pick. Whether or not that happens, I don't know. But just maybe something you're looking for at this point with a lot of new faces out on the field and the coaching situation being what it is.
Well, there's actually two different things I'm looking for. The one that I have like a thing I'm looking for and like the backup thing. The thing I'm looking for is I want to see the young guys play, the rookies play. But as you mentioned, Marvin is still in charge, so there's no guarantee they're actually going to get on the field any more than they have to. But I would love to see McCarron and Driscoll out there the next 2 weeks. And I know, it's Dalton's job and blah blah whatever. But if you're not going anywhere, what's the point of keeping them out there? You want to put your best players out there and try to win. But if you want to see how the future is going to be, I'd love to see these young guys. Now, obviously on the offensive line, the linebackers, et cetera, you are going to see them because there's no choice. But I would absolutely I'd really like to see McCarron start a game, maybe Driscoll. And, obviously the offensive line is in shambles right now and it's kind of falling apart and everyone's either on IR or just not very good. So whoever you put out there is going to get killed. So if you're going to kill someone, why not Driscoll who can run, or McCarron, unless you are trying to, if you think you're still going to get first round trade, pick for him and you don't want him to look like crap because he's constantly throwing under duress and getting beat up. But I'd like to see the young players play, as many of them as they can put in. The other thing, because that's probably not going to happen, Marvin is still Marvin. I'm sure he's going to put, Michael Johnson and all these guys out there, and they're going to play all the snaps, and you're not going to see Willis and Lawson any more than he has to. So the other thing I want to see is can we stop a running game? I mean, we've given up it's 360, 380 rushing yards the last 2 weeks against Jordan Howard, and then last week against Latavius Murray and Jerick McKinnon. So the thing I'd like to see is the Lions are not a very good running team. They're a good scoring team. They're a good passing team. But Amir Abdullah and the Theo Riddick and them, they're averaging like 3.5 yards a carry. So it's a team that doesn't run well. They can't run well. Can we please stop at least that? So I just want to see that our defense isn't dead. I want to see they have a pulse, and I want to see they can at least stop a running game that they should be able to stop. If I can't get the rookies in, at least give me that.
Now the Bengals haven't put out publicly, obviously because Marvin Lewis is their coach and he's under contract, but they haven't put out any names of replacement coaches. Beat writers have, and other, people at Cincy Jungle and whatnot have, and they've talked about Paul Gunther. And to me, for a variety of reasons, you and I talked about the coaching staff last week in terms of ways to fix the Bengals. To me, to your point, that's a staggering thought, because the Bengals, if you can believe it, the Bengals defense, which has been really the linchpin since 2009 of this team, the Bengals defense is ranked number 32, dead last in terms of yards given up per game against the run. That to me is a direct indictment of, yes, there's injuries, but that's a direct indictment of the coaching. And you cannot to me, I don't know how you reward somebody a head coaching position when they are dead last in the NFL, and it's such a critical category, especially in the AFC North where you want to run the football. So, yeah, good point about what to watch for with the Lions. And really, to me, it's about looking at this depth, supposed depth, and these young guys, and seeing how they play, how they perform. Maybe when the pressure's off a little bit, and because they're out of the playoff picture and all of that. That's kind of the key at this point. Now, one more thing before a couple of topics. I want to ask you, because we're talking now about Marvin Lewis and his potential departure with the Bengals. And, we kind of talked about this for the last, really this entire season. Fans have asked us a lot of stuff, and that's just, it's kind of been a major question of fans this year. But he's, especially now with these rumors, and I wrote a post on, kind of highlighting some of the best moments in Marvin Lewis's tenure in Cincinnati as their head coach. So, I know it's easy to kind of, for lack of better words, crap on Marvin at this point because of the last 2 seasons and the playoff losses and all of that, but he has done some good things with this team. So I guess if there was a moment, if there was a game, if there was something that I could say, Scott, this is your favorite Marvin moment, or maybe it's even a little stretch of games or what have you. What would you say is kind of a moment where you're like, yeah, good job, Marv?
Okay, so you wanted a positive moment.
Yes.
When you mentioned it before the show, I was thinking the other direction because that's a lot easier.
Oh. It is a lot easier. So I guess I'm just asking you all kinds of difficult questions, whether it's fantasy football or Marvin. I'm catching you off guard.
And I mean, it's obviously you'd love to say the big game, but the 0-7 in the playoffs, it's really hard to have that big game. The struggles, all the struggles, obviously in prime time and against the winning teams. It's hard to try to, at least for me, without. I guess I'd have to spend like a week of research going back through every single game and game film and try to find, okay, here's the one thing he did I liked. I obviously, it was hard to say, yeah, man, a positive. I may have to defer till next month to think of that, because the thing I was thinking of, I mean, I like the things that he did. I mean, early on, I like that he turned them from a, just a horrible, 3-13, 4-12 kind of team to a team that would win 7, 8, 9 games every year. That was a nice thing to see. I mean, that's not a moment. That was more of a overall thing. I mean, when they, kind of started when they drafted Carson Palmer and then had some decent draft picks. I mean, that was nice because they were just so awful at drafting before he got there. And obviously, they've had some good and bad drafts. I'm not saying he's a great drafter, but compared to the picks they were making before he got there, the guys like Peter Wark at number 4 overall, David Klingler, Akili Smith, Renard Wilson, and so on and so on. And just, yeah. So I guess if I had to pick one, now that I've thought about it for a minute and wasted some time and stalled, I guess I would, and I didn't like this pick at the time, but I'm going to say when they picked Carson Palmer. So that's one of the first things he did as a coach, his first year. And the reason I say that is because it was the first pick that I could remember as a Bengals fan since Willie Anderson, where when they made the pick, I'm like, okay, this, is not just one of these, where you just throw your hands in the air like, screw it, I guess we'll wait till next year, see if they can figure it out. I mean, it turned out to be, until he got hurt, this first, he sat the first year, the second year, he was pretty solid. That third year, and, 05 probably would have been the MVP if it wasn't. I think that might have been the year Peyton Manning went crazy and threw like 40 or 50 touchdowns. So he probably would have been the MVP that year, and then, got hurt and kind of slowly went downhill. But, he's still playing today, which is a testament for the guy 14 years later. I mean, he's not obviously not playing right now. I think he's on IR, but, playing up to this season and a decent level, an NFL starter, which is a hard thing to do and do it for that long. So I'd say that'd be the moment because it was, a actual solid first-round pick. It wasn't trading up for Kajana Carter. It wasn't one of these silly kind of things. It was a legit, reasonable pick, and it kind of started the franchise. It turned them from this abyss of awful, and that kind of turned it around to, hey, now we're a fairly decent team. Now we're watchable. Now we're respectable. Now we're actually getting, primetime games, and we're not winning them, but we're getting them. And, we're actually getting the playoffs. And it was kind of the turning point, I guess, of respectability. And so, yeah, if I had to think of, yeah, it, man, you kind of stuck me with a good, because I was so ready for the other extreme. But yeah, I'll go with the drafting of Palmer with on short notice.
Yeah, and obviously a couple of things with that. That draft class in general was solid with him and Eric Steinbach in the second round. They had Kelly Washington, a guy who contributed for him in the third round. Just some good players that played well for them for a period of time. Ironically, Scott, if you remember, the two players that the Bengals were heavily looking at with the number 1 overall pick was Carson Palmer and Terrence Newman. And of course, Terrence Newman ended up becoming a Bengal late in his career, doing some nice things for the Bengals then. And so I just think that that's ironic. But you had mentioned, to get Carson Palmer there was a no-brainer. New head coach. The other, Akili Smith didn't work. They gave him 4 years, didn't work. Number 1 overall pick, Heisman Trophy winner, the best quarterback and best, probably at that point, viewed as the best player in that draft. Marvin Lewis had to make that pick. And it was ironic because he's obviously a defensive coach. For me, I would say the memory that kind of sticks out, one of them, there are a few, but one of them that sticks out the most to me is in that first season that he coached in 2003, where he and his team, they got off to a very lackluster start. I think they were 1-4. They rattled off 3 straight wins, and all of a sudden they were 4-5 and kind of starting to get into the AFC playoff mix. And fans, when they started to, kind of be same old, another bad coach and all this kind of stuff, they started winning some games. At 4-5, they hosted the 9-0 Kansas City Chiefs. And that was the first, Chad Johnson at that point, he really didn't have too much to mouth off about in his first 2 seasons with the Bengals. And that was the game, if you remember, Chad made his first of many bold predictions, bold proclamations, whatever you want to call it, where he guaranteed the Bengals would beat the 9-0 Chiefs on their home field. And sure enough, Johnson had an okay day. He had about 75 yards receiving. But it was Peter Warwick, the guy you mentioned, that absolutely exploded that day. He had about 117, 120 yards. He had a touchdown reception and a punt return touchdown. And he stole the show from a guy that Kansas City employed on kick returns and as a wide receiver in Dante Hall. And that was really kind of a statement. Even though the Bengals missed out on the playoffs that year, that was kind of a statement game that really set the tone for that year. It set the tone for another 8-8 season right after that, Carson Palmer's first year, and then finally the 2005 season when Carson Palmer got his starting quarterback legs under him, and they were insane. So that's one game where I was like, wow, that's a game that really kind of started to shift a little bit of the national perception, I guess, of the Bengals and Marvin Lewis's tenure with the team. Do you remember that game, right?
Yeah, and I guess I was considered that more of a Chad Johnson moment just because
I guess so. But I had read in looking up some more stuff with this post that it's going to be going up on Cincy Jungle and potentially SBNation.com. I had read some stuff that Marvin kind of did with this young team. He kind of did this thing where Saturday night in the hotel, got them all together and played an old Muhammad Ali fight where Muhammad Ali was the underdog, and maybe Muhammad Ali was doing his thing where he was, proclaiming that he would still win and all that kind of stuff. And, Willie Anderson made a quote that said something, we were already pumped up all week, but, that was kind of something akin to that was kind of icing on the cake, or that helped, or what have you. And, it was a game that the Bengals, even later in Marvin Lewis's tenure, they didn't normally win those games, whether it was before or later in Marvin Lewis's tenure. They just, good team comes in and, they would kind of crawl in their shell, and this was a team that was exciting and young and just kind of played with nothing to lose and, kind of relished in the spotlight, I think.
I just looked that game up because I was kind of curious. Amazingly, there were no turnovers.
Yep.
No turnovers, very few penalties. Both teams, the quarterbacks had huge days. Rudy Johnson had a huge day. Interestingly, it seems like the key to that game was they totally shut Priest Holmes down. He had 27 rushing touchdowns that year. Going back to fantasy, I did not have him, but whoever did, obviously rode that very far. Dude had 27 touchdowns, over 2,000 total yards. That game, the Bengals held him to 60 rushing yards and no touchdowns. So they obviously had figured out whatever the Chiefs were doing defensively. And in true Bengal fashion, or true Marvin fashion, they had a 24-7 lead going in the fourth quarter and nearly gave it away because, we aren't going to adjust in the second half.
Yeah, and that defense wasn't anywhere near as stacked as this current or even a few years prior, the defense is there. And but that's just a memory that sticks out as one that's like, hey, that was pretty cool. That was a pretty cool, especially in that first year after so many consecutive years of just terrible football. You see them do that, and it wasn't like a spoiler, 2-11 at the end of the year type of thing. It was actually a pretty legitimate win with a team that was, pretty talented in a lot of different areas. So you can let us know what your favorite Marvin moment is. You can get in touch with us on YouTube. We're live in YouTube and in the chat. So if you've got a moment that you want to talk about, let us know. You can let us know on cincyjungle.com in the comment thread. We're live there. We're on iTunes. We're on SoundCloud. We're on, as I mentioned, YouTube. So subscribe to all of those channels there. You can also let us know on Twitter at BengalsOBI or email theobinsider@gmail.com. Scott, how are you doing on time? I've got another in the segment of improving the Bengals in 2018. Do you have a few minutes?
Okay. To it.
All right, let's do it. Last week, we started a series that I kind of want to do with Scott and if we bring in other co-hosts or whatever, I kind of want to talk about that with them too. But we started a thing of how to fix the Bengals in 2018 in this offseason. And last week we started with the coaching staff, and we talked about purging the coaching staff. I don't think it needs to be a totally wide sweeping, everybody gone type of thing, but there are some major coaches who've been there for a long time, and some egregious errors that have been made and some regression that have been made by some of these coaches. So that's kind of where we started this week, Scott. And this is kind of a little bit my baby, so you are welcome. It sounds like you might agree with me and disagree with me on this, but the Bengals, especially in this recent incarnation of their little mini dynasty from 2011 to 2015, they really relied on draft and develop, find out who those best players are and extend those core players in the draft. Now, obviously, there's nothing wrong with that strategy. If you have the ability to get a lot of good players in the draft, find starters, find quality role players, and you can extend them and they want to stay with your team, obviously you want to do that. Now, my problems are this, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. The Bengals still employ one of the smallest scouting units in the NFL, and they rely heavily on their coaches, which is a big burden on them. Now, granted, coaches are always involved in the scouting process, but they rely more heavily on their coaches than many other teams do in the scouting process. Their scouting unit is smaller than most other teams. No true GM. The owner holds the title of GM as well. So there's that issue. So if you really focus on the draft, you have to absolutely nail the draft in order for your team to be continuously competitive, because this team has decided to not be active in outside free agency. You look at this season, they focused inward. They re-signed Brandon LaFell. They re-signed Randy Bullock. They re-signed Dre Kirkpatrick. They didn't re-sign Andrew Whitworth and Kevin Zeitler, which were huge mistakes. And yet they didn't do anything in outside free agency to remedy those losses of really the past two off seasons. Yeah, they got Andre Smith, kind of a rental deal, but they relied on Cedric Ogbuehi, Jake Fisher, former high picks, that's not working out to this point. I think that the Bengals, and this doesn't mean they need to break the bank in free agency or anything like that, but you look at, their big outside free agents get this year was Kevin Minter, ended up on IR and did absolutely nothing special this year. So I think that the Bengals need to properly supplement their draft and develop strategy with outside free agency or outside free agents that can fill a starting position, can fill role-playing positions right away, and not just kind of special teams guys, not the Bengals every year are $10 to $15 million under the cap because they do not go in outside free agency. So Scott, I wanted to see what you thought. Am I thinking, hey, am I being a little bit of Daddy Warbucks here and saying throw the money around, or do I have at least some form of a point?
Yeah, I mean, we probably would not do very well on that show called The View. As I understand, they have different opinions and they argue because we tend to agree more often than not. And I agree with you. Yeah, you need to do something in free agency. And that's, I guess, my belief is you use free agency to fill your roster so you have no holes. You may not necessarily have the best people, but you've got to have people that you could say, come September, these are guys who I can live with starting. So when you enter the draft, you don't enter the draft for these massive holes you have to fill, and you can, grab guys who are great values that fall to you in the second round, third round, fourth round, so forth. But to do that, obviously you have to spend the money, and with the salary cap, there's this, obviously the ceiling, but there's also a floor, so you have to spend it somewhere. So you can spend it on the guys you already have, or you can spend it on other guys. And as you mentioned, obviously the Bengals prefer to spend it on the people who are already in the building for whatever reason. They know the system better. They know them better. They know what they're getting. But because of that, they do miss out sometimes on some good guys outside. And I think that's the interesting thing. Okay, now you get, in theory, a new coach, assuming it's an outside perspective, an outside coach, someone coming in who has their own view, their own philosophy. They may look at this team and say, hey, we don't really have it at these 4 or 5 positions. Re-signing these people doesn't solve the issue. We need to look outside. And I know there's been some talk back and forth. Obviously, people were saying, well, you have to draft a tackle in the first round and kind of go from there, and it's going to be a high pick. And, get one of the guys from Notre Dame or the kid from Oklahoma, or whatever. And then some people are saying, well, no, it's a good quarterback draft. Let's get the guy that's going to replace Andy Dalton, even though we don't run out. We have McCarron or even Driscoll. And just one quick point on that point. Interestingly, there are actually a number of quarterbacks available if the Bengals were to decide that Dalton wasn't their guy. The next guy comes in. The team we just played, Teddy Bridgewater is a free agent, as is Case Keenum. Jimmy Garoppolo, who seems to be having a great year, is a free agent at the end of the season. Drew Brees, I know he's like almost 40, but Tom Brady seems to be doing about 40. And then Kirk Cousins, the guy who gets franchised every year. I don't think he gets franchised. I'm not sure if you can even franchise a guy, in perpetuity. I think at some point he just has to sign somewhere. So it'd be interesting to see if they did something like that. Obviously those would be bigger money deals, so they probably wouldn't go that route. But yeah, it'd be nice to see them make have a new blood come in and say, hey, we have the same people. What does keeping the same people do for you when you are a team that's won, 10 games the last 2 years? Obviously that's not working. If it isn't working, if your tire's flat, you can rotate the tires all you want, but you still have the same 4 flat tires. At some point, you need to get some new tires in my car.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to me, there should be nothing off, like kind of what you just said right there. There should be nothing off of the table for discussion in terms of changing an approach, in terms of who might be coaching candidates, all of that, because this is a team now who has operated very conservatively in free agency and in the draft. I mean, and that's kind of my problem with this is, it's one thing if it kind of is like, you got to be aggressive somewhere, right? I mean, if you're not, because this is a team that does not move up in the draft either. And, they don't move up. And to me, if you're going to use the draft and get these guys that you develop and all that kind of stuff, yes, best player available and letting guys that maybe fall to you at not a certain position of glaring need at the moment makes a lot of sense. But I kind of also am like, if you're not going to get the impact guys on free agency, why are you not moving up and getting truly the guys you want in the draft? I mean, there has to be some form of aggression somewhere. And the point is, and every team suffers it. Every team suffers it. I mean, you're going to lose a gamble here and there. You're going to lose. There's going to be draft busts. There are going to be free agent guys that you spend too much money on and they don't work out as well, or they don't live up to that contract. But the point is, this really isn't. Either way, the Bengals aren't really doing things that many other teams do to give their roster the most influx of talent as possible. Now, I think the Bengals, even though Joe Mixon hasn't had the eye-popping stats this year and whatnot, I don't think – I think it was a good move for them to move back, get another pick, and that sort of thing. If they had moved up for a guy with that kind of baggage, obviously that would be a big PR nightmare. But, to move back, get another pick, especially after a year where they struggled, and, you kind of bolster the roster elsewhere, I think that was a good move. But there are times when you compile all these picks, and this draft class was a prime example of it, where they let go. They initially cut Brandon Wilson, they cut Jake Elliott, their tight end Mason Schreck they got in the 7th round, hurting on IR. So to me, if you're going to kind of hoard these picks, you may want to use some of those to move up and get impact players, get a specific player you want, and get more talented players that can help you right away rather than some of these other guys. Now, if you want to hoard the picks, great, but at some point, you got to do something in free agency. Now I get there's a weird dichotomy with losing free agents nets you more compensatory picks and that whole thing. You can trade compensatory picks now. That started this last draft. So my thing is, I don't necessarily need to see them spend a ton of money on free agency and go, wheeling and dealing come draft time. But to me, there needs to be some form of aggression in order to make this team better. And, unfortunately, you kind of saw, starting with the 2016 offseason and into this offseason, they got fleeced of some of their best players who were free agents. They decided not to pay them. Then they decided not to pay other outside free agents that much money. And then they didn't move up in the draft for impact players to replace these guys that they lost. Now, granted, Bengals did what they could at wide receiver, or what they thought was the best move at wide receiver, to get John Ross, Tyler Boyd to replace Mohamed Sanu and Marvin Jones. That hasn't worked so far. But I would like to see this team be more aggressive. And I think if they continue to kind of do a little bit what they do in the draft, I think if you add a quality free agent or two, outside free agent, where you go, hey, that's an exciting guy to, that's a plug and play starter, or, that's a guy that can help them right away in a number of different fashions. I think that's something that needs to take place with this team this year, because, it's been a few years now where they haven't done much in free agency, and it's really hurt them, I think. I think, I'm kind of looking at some comments here. It's, there is some aggression with this team from the fan base. Bill Williams, I like that one. Michael Myers talking about Joe Mixon. Mixon will be amazing if we fix the line. Yeah, I mean, I get that, and I agree. I mean, he's a guy that creates a lot of stuff on his own. And then that the offensive line was something for me where that should have been that should always be priority one. I mean, I think any team any team you want to build, quarterback, offensive line, and getting to the passer is always the premium, and the Bengals have, unfortunately, kind of built outside in. AJ Green, first round pick, a wide receiver. Tyler Boyd, second round pick, a wide receiver. John Ross, number 9 pick, a wide receiver. The list kind of goes on and on. And AJ Green, obviously on track for a Hall of Fame career. They have had some first round picks in the offensive line and all of that, but it just seems that Mike Brown seems to get a little bit more enamored with the skill positions, the outside positions, than other teams do. And unfortunately, there's kind of a little bit more flash than substance. And you've seen that the past 2 seasons with this team, who, as Scott said, had 11 wins and 1 tie in almost 2 entire seasons. Not good. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're going to move on to some listener questions here. Before we do, again, you can get this program on cincyjungle.com, on iTunes, on SoundCloud, on YouTube. You can get in touch with the program on Twitter at BengalsOBI and the OBinsider@gmail.com, and join us live every episode on YouTube and on Cincy Jungle. We appreciate all of your support and all of the questions that you have sent us. We received this one a few days ago, and it was obviously in response to another, I think this is our buddy Chris Berrien, to be honest with you, enigmatic at CT Berrien. What are your thoughts on drafting a quarterback in the first round, starting McCarron and letting go of Dalton like we did in 2003 with Palmer and Kitna? Well, little different situation in terms of Palmer and Kitna. Kitna was already on the team and started a number of games for the Bengals. He was a guy that they relied on, I think, pretty heavily in 2001, and kind of was in and out of the lineup 2002, and then 2003 he had that amazing year when the new coach and a new influx of talent and all of that. And Kitna won Comeback Player of the Year that year, which was, he was borderline an MVP candidate that year. He had a great year that year. But so it's a little different from that standpoint. AJ McCarron's only started, 4 total games, one of which was in the postseason, whereas Kitna had started a number of games for the Bengals. But I understand the question. I understand the point. I don't know what to do next year between Dalton and McCarron. Now, Dalton still has a manageable contract for a guy that puts up the numbers that he does, the wins that he does. McCarron, everybody's kind of talking about McCarron as if he is written in stone in being a Bengal next year. Now, he has an arbitration going on in terms of his status of being either he is slated to be a restricted free agent, but he is trying to become an unrestricted free agent where he can hit the open market. That has yet to be decided upon at this point. But even if he does remain a restricted free agent where the Bengals can kind of manage that pretty well, there could be a team who is quarterback hungry and wants to take him, wants to offer him a ridiculous offer sheet that the Bengals don't want to match. And, the whole thing that goes with that, with restricted free agents, we just saw what happened with Andrew Hawkins a couple of years ago. And all of a sudden, McCarron might not be on the team in 2018 to kind of let him play and then, kind of draft and develop a quarterback. So Dalton is on the roster next year. His contract is manageable. But the Bengals also have kind of an opt-out of sorts if they want to get rid of Andy Dalton, which is it's kind of fortuitous because new coach may come in and all of a sudden kind of say, sorry, Andy, sorry, AJ, you guys aren't my guy. And he may say that based on, if there's a new offensive coordinator that coach brings in and all of that. I'm not opposed to the idea of starting AJ McCarron if the Bengals part ways with Dalton and let a guy develop. But we've seen a number of guys come in and maybe struggle a little bit in their first. Look no further than the 2016 drafts and the first and second overall picks. Goff and Wentz struggled a little bit in their rookie years, and all of a sudden now they are two of the better statistical quarterbacks this season. And a lot of that has to do with, to my prior point, those teams doing a lot of things in free agency, those teams committing to those young quarterbacks and making sure that they have as much help that they need, and kind of going that route. So, to be honest with you, I guess the question would say, am I opposed to it? Am I for it? It would be weird to see kind of a McCarron era start, I guess. But at that point, if McCarron isn't the guy that we've seen in the preseason and isn't the winner that we've seen at the college level, then you've kind of at some point wasted maybe another half of a season, another good portion of a season, and then you bring in the rookie. Who knows how the rookie does at that point? So there's kind of a fine line to walk there, but a new coach, someone far smarter than me, would make that decision. I'm very interested to see what happens with Andy Dalton this offseason. You know, I think he has some respect around the league. He's won a lot of games. He's put up a lot of stats. I don't know if other coaches, other organizations say, yeah, he's okay, or if they look at Marvin and say, you know, potentially some of his postseason issues, the big game issues, is on Marvin, is on the culture of that organization. And maybe Andy Dalton goes to another organization with some talent and he's a different guy. I don't know. And people that are far smarter than me will have to figure that out. But I do think, especially if there's a new head coach, I do think that there's going to be at least a relatively high pick used on a quarterback this year, because whether it's Dalton being shown the door and McCarron gets the nod, or whether it's McCarron going elsewhere because of his impending free agency status, restricted or unrestricted, the Bengals are probably going to need another quarterback. I'm not sold on Jeff Driscoll. Marvin Lewis and this staff seems to like him. If they're gone, again, Driscoll might be another guy that gets shown the door. So I expect a relatively high pick to be shown the door. Thanks for the question there on Twitter. There was another one we received. I'm trying to remember where. Oh, I believe it was through a comment on our I can't find exactly where it was, but someone was asking us about Baker Mayfield and our thoughts on Baker Mayfield, the Oklahoma quarterback who won the Heisman Trophy this year, as a pick for the Bengals. Now, there are a number of quarterbacks, and everybody has their own individual thoughts on each college quarterback coming out, but there are probably anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 different college quarterbacks who could or should go in the first round, depending on who comes out, depending on how they do in pre-draft workouts, all of that stuff. So you've got Baker Mayfield, in no particular order here. I'm just naming them off the top of my head here. Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, potentially Sam Darnold if he ends up coming out of USC. You have Josh Rosen out of UCLA. You know, he's another gunslinger there. And you've got the kid from Wyoming. Okay. Now, to me, there are certain things I like about Baker Mayfield. I really like his intangibles. I like his grit. I like his performance in big games. You know, I didn't like that. If you remember a few weeks back, he caught some flack for kind of, I think it was grabbing his crotch when he had a big comeback win and all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, I think it was against Baylor or something. Kind of caught some flack, had to do a public apology, and people kind of freaked out about that. I wasn't wild about that either, but I wasn't all over his back about it. But what bothers me, and I hate to say it, what bothers me is the 6'1" height. Dalton himself is 6'2", 6'3" on a good day with really big spikes. You know, I obviously usually the taller the guy gets, less mobile. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. Mayfield can move around with his legs, do a lot of different things. I just worry about a 6'1" quarterback at the next level. Now, obviously, everybody's going to get on me, especially the people who like the Mayfield pick. Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, there are guys like that who just find ways to win, can scramble around and have great pocket presence. And I would not be opposed to Baker Mayfield, depending on where the Bengals pick and where they get him. I would not be opposed to a quarterback in general. There are a couple guys that I like better than maybe other people like. To me, if I'm going to take one of these quarterbacks, I would think it would be Mayfield. I really like Darnold, and I know I'm a little bit of an SC homer, but I just see a lot of Brett Favre in him. Now, there's a lot of guys. If you look at Joe Goodberry, he's not too wild on him. If you look at Cody Toomey, another guy who's been on this program before, he's not overly wild about him. They think he needs another year in college. I get it, and I don't disagree with that necessarily, but I think that kid has a lot of tools that can be worked with at the NFL level. I think Mayfield does as well. But I think, especially depending on who the new head coach is, if there is a new head coach, I think quarterback is very much in the discussion if the Bengals end up in the top 10 of the draft, which it looks like they will. And they should have their pick of probably, of those 5 guys I mentioned, there may be only 2 of them off the board, if that. So, you know, they should have a pretty good option on the board here at quarterback if they choose. So obviously, he just because he won the Heisman and all that stuff, Mayfield is kind of the most high profile guy, I guess, for Cincinnati Bengals fans. They're more attuned to Lamar Jackson in Louisville, who won the Heisman last year. So it just kind of depends on the coach. Again, I hate to kind of give a cop-out answer, but personally, I like Mayfield. I don't necessarily love him because of his height or lack thereof, but it depends on the coach. And it depends on what kind of scheme they want to run. It depends on if Bill Lazor's still the offensive coordinator or if it's a different one. I do like a lot of the grit and tenacity of the quarterbacks in this year's draft. I really do. Mayfield seems to have a lot of intangibles. I mentioned Darnold seems to have a lot of intangibles. Jackson is just a freak of an athlete, though he's a little thin. There's a lot of things to like from a lot of these quarterbacks. So it's just a matter of preference for the coaching staff and who's going to be the offensive coordinator, who's going to be the head coach, and who they prefer there. So kind of, I don't want to cop out there, but that's kind of what I feel there. I have been seeing some questions, and we had a comment on this is the one I was thinking of, the comment on YouTube. Mike Watts. I would love for the Bengals to go after Josh Gordon this offseason with him next to AJ Green. That's enough tools. Obviously, for that to happen, that would probably mean bye-bye to Brandon LaFell. And for a lot of people, if you say, hey, Josh Gordon swapping out for Brandon LaFell, fine. Talent-wise, there's some disparity there, obviously. But, obviously you have Josh Gordon, AJ Green, potentially John Ross, rejuvenated, healthy in his second year. You got Tyler Boyd still in the mix. You've got some good weapons there for whoever is playing quarterback for the Bengals next year. I want to reference something, and for those of you who have not seen it, it's an article, and if you follow Lance McAllister on Twitter, the Cincinnati radio personality, he put it out there. I want to say it's WK WCPO, unfortunately, again, I live in California, so I don't know kind of some of the media, the specific media channels and stuff in Cincinnati, in the Cincinnati area. I want to say it's WCPO, potentially. And it was it was an article put out by Jack Brennan. And Jack Brennan was a former Bengals PR guy with Lewis under Mike Brown for years. I think about 15 plus years with the Bengals. He put out a very interesting article after the Bengals lost in Minnesota, talking about a lack of accountability, talking about certain issues that he had with Marvin Lewis, not during his tenure, but kind of now looking back and saying, you know, there were guys that were just kind of allowed to do a lot of things that a lot of professional athletes aren't in winning organizations. Marvin Lewis maybe had a little too much trust in some of the quote unquote locker room leaders that other coaches don't have. And he thinks it's been kind of a little bit of a poison and or created this toxic culture where, yeah, the talent gets them to win games, but it's those big games. It's doing the little things right. It's a lot of different things that are suffering because of the culture that Marvin Lewis and for that matter, what Mike Brown has allowed Marvin Lewis to create with some of these players. Now, I look at Josh Gordon and he has, after being out of football, I think 2 years, if not longer, he comes back. He's made some plays for the Browns. Good for him. He claims that he's completely sober off of everything. If you're unfamiliar with Josh Gordon, he had a major drug addiction problem to marijuana. Some people may not have the level of problem with that idea that others may, but you know, he went to rehab. He also, I believe, had some alcohol issues. So, you know, and they kept compiling on each other for him to miss quite some time. So I just look at this and I go, well, I think on paper, man, that would be awesome, especially if Josh Gordon is clean, if he is healthy, and you know, you have him on the outside, you have AJ Green on the outside, you have John Ross in there. I mean, it's like, wow, that would be great. But it's to bring him in would be a very typical Bengals move in terms of, or a Mike Brown move, I guess I should say, bringing in a troubled guy potentially for, you know, a pretty good deal for his talent level because of his issues. Number two, if he does slip up and you pay him some money, he's gone. I mean, I don't know that he's getting another chance in this league if something happens to him in terms of drugs or alcohol or what have you. I think he is done. So that is a gigantic risk for any team to take on. And I think that this is exactly, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as that How to Fix the Bengals 2018 series continues on this program. But I think this is going back into doing some of the things that, yeah, it's talent, and yeah, it's a short-term fix, and yeah, he can help short-term, but you got to look a bit more long-term, and you have to create a different culture with this team. And I think that I don't want to judge Josh Gordon. I don't know him personally. I don't know where he's at this moment in terms of his headspace, in terms of his personal life. He claims, like I said, he's sober. Awesome if he is. That's, you know, it sounds like he's overcome a lot. So good for him if he is. But major issues. Now, if you want to kind of go a different sport and a different type of thing, if you remember a few years, Josh Hamilton, he was a guy that had all kinds of issues in terms of, now a little harder drug. It was like meth and cocaine and all that kind of stuff, but also alcohol issues, partying issues. And he was out of baseball for a while, even though his talent was incredible. Well, he got himself clean, he got himself right, and obviously had a great career with the Rangers, then moved to the Angels and had a pretty good few years with them, even though there was a lot of risk factors involved there. Well, a few years into him being with the Los Angeles Angels, he had a little bit of a slip up, and the Angels, the Bengals, the Angels let him go he ended up going back to the Rangers. But the Angels were on the hook for a lot of money to Josh Hamilton. And they knew the risks going into that. Now, granted, baseball and football and the, how those two leagues operate are different. But I think that the story is pretty pertinent. And I think Josh Gordon is one of those players that coaches drool over, and you think about him, oh my gosh, got to get him on the roster and all of that. But I don't think when you have AJ Green, who had just made his 7th straight Pro Bowl, even though he's entering his 8th year, he's still playing some very high quality football. You drafted a wide receiver, number 9 overall last year. Year before that, you drafted a guy in the 2nd round at wide receiver. I don't think the need necessarily fits that at this point. Yes, the Bengals need more weapons, obviously, because their offense has been anemic, but I think you really stock up on the offensive line, maybe add another wide receiver, and maybe the mid rounds of the draft or a free agent. And I think and potentially a different quarterback. And I think things look a lot different, especially if you have a new coach, new offensive coordinator, new game plan. And I wish the best for Josh Gordon, even if he stays within the division and ends up torching the Bengals on a number of different games. I hope personally, I wish the best for him. I would just stay away from him for a number of different reasons. And I think this is a critical offseason for this team where they need to change a lot of different approaches, a lot of what they do. And I think bringing in Josh Gordon, unfortunately, would kind of fall back into what they have normally done. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I see K Road saying, I don't smoke, but by no means, but it is weed, not crack, big risk. I get it. There are people that are on marijuana is legal in a lot of different states now in the United States. But this isn't talking about I'm not talking about the moral issue. I'm not talking about a legal issue necessarily. I'm talking about Josh Gordon, who has had the league has stated alcohol, marijuana, they don't want their players doing that. And he has had a number of different issues with that. And that's my problem. That there's a big risk if he ends up having a slide back like Josh Hamilton, who I mentioned. That's a big financial risk. It's a big PR black eye on the team, and they couldn't. You just can't hang on to a player like that. Now maybe he comes very cheap, and maybe he's a guy that the risk isn't there. Maybe the financial risk isn't there. I just don't. I think he'll demand a little more than minimum or anything like that. I look at the PR side, I look at the risk side, and I don't see it. And especially it's kind of the same thing. Like I said, they've already stocked up on wide receiver. This isn't a moral issue on marijuana, in my opinion. This isn't, even a legal issue. It's more of a risk versus reward and, financial risk and all and PR stuff. That's kind of what I've worried about. So, that's my take. I see Michael Myers said I would rather ask for Joe Thomas. Yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen. Bill Williams, thank you for this. Search Google for Brennan Lewis is both the best coach and most disappointing. Thank you very much. That was the article I referenced. It's a very good read, and it's very insightful given it's from a guy who worked for the team. And, I think it's worth a read if you haven't checked it out. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Appreciate you tuning in. We're going to get out of here. You can get this program on SoundCloud, on iTunes, on YouTube. And we're on Cincy Jungle as well. You can join us live on Cincy Jungle and YouTube every episode. And you can get in touch with the program on Twitter at BengalsOBI and the OB Insider at gmail.com. Thanks for all your comments, your questions. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the program. We're not just a little programming note. I don't know if we're going to have a show next week or not. It's kind of smack dab in the middle of just after Christmas and just before New Year's. A lot of people have a lot of stuff going on. Yes, the Bengals still are playing ball and all of that, and we want to give you some content. So maybe we'll do a short show or something like that. But as of now, it's a little up in the air. But we'll keep you posted. So follow us on Twitter to get that information, or follow Cincy Jungle. All of that. Appreciate all the support, guys. Have a great Christmas. If we don't see you before, have a happy New Year. And for those of you who celebrated Hanukkah, I believe, I know it started before last program. I think maybe we're on the last day or so of Hanukkah. So if that's what you're celebrating, happy Hanukkah as well. Be good to each other. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next episode. Thanks, guys.